Welcome, everybody. This is going to be fun. My name is Joseph Meyer. I am a junior at the University of Missouri, Columbia, Mizzou, and today we are doing a case study event on the 15-year anniversary of the March 11th and March the 12th, 2006 tornado outbreak, which was Missouri's largest tornado outbreak to date. It was a two-day event over a 48-hour window. So a quick little overview of what we are going to get into a little bit. In the 48 hours between the afternoon of March the 11th and the morning hours of March the 13th, Missouri saw its largest tornado outbreak in recorded history. In total, 49 tornadoes touched down across Missouri alone, with additional tornadoes in the surrounding states, Kansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Illinois, Iowa, these states kind of surrounding Missouri. The breakdown of this is we had 21 F0 tornadoes, 9 F1 tornadoes, 9 F2 tornadoes, 9 F3 tornadoes, and 1 F4 tornado. These are the tornadoes that just touched down in Missouri alone for over the 48 hours of this event. Every corner of the state was impacted, from the hills and mountains of southeastern Missouri up to the plains of northwestern Missouri. Not really anybody except for like the boot heel and a far, far southeast Missouri escaped any kind of severe weather from this event at all. And on top of the tornado, we had hail in excess of softballs and winds in excess of 80 miles an hour kind of scattered around the area. And we'll look at some of the more poignant scenes from that hail damage and the wind damage when we get around to it. All in all, this event would take 10 lives and with around 100 people injured throughout this entire event, which for a 49 tornado outbreak is fairly low. And we will talk about a common theme that is going to surround these 10 deaths and some of the messaging that we can do to kind of avoid those deaths. So this was the Day 8 Severe Weather Outlook, issued way back on March the 3rd, or actually, it was right. It was issued on March the 3rd. And back then, the SPC did not do little individual outlooks that they do now. They kind of just highlighted a broad general area and said severe weather is possible in this area at any time. So really a large portion of the central and eastern United States was under this from March 3rd through the end of the period. So really any time within there, severe weather was going to be a potential. So as we get a little bit closer, this is March the 11th. March the 11th was a Saturday. This is the Day 3 convective outlook, and in the highlighted is kind of the most poignant parts where we had favorably veering low-level flow, which would support some supercell thunderstorms with an isolated tornado possible. They were only focusing on kind of far southeastern Missouri up into Illinois and Indiana, but that outlook expands into the Day 2 outlook. A large portion of the central and eastern United States was underneath it, including an area of enhanced potential from Arkansas up into Illinois. In the outlook, it says supercells will be likely with discrete storms, especially early in the development of the MCS, which is basically squall line before storm coverage becomes widespread, with very large hail will be possible out of this event on the Day 2. So if you were a forecaster waking up on Saturday, March the 11th, you were going to have a busy weekend ahead of you, and you could tell that fairly quickly. We had a slight risk for that day with a 10% tornado risk and some enhanced hail and wind threats as well for the St. Louis area, for the Columbia area, down into Cape Girardeau. Deep layer vertical shear profiles will support supercell storm structures with very large hail likely. Isolated tornadoes will also be possible, especially by late afternoon and into the early evening as the low jet strengthens and enhances low-level photographs. We're going to get more in depth into that as we head into the evening. So not only did you have this round of severe weather, which is a significant round in of itself, but you had the following day where you had a large moderate risk for severe weather for Sunday, March the 12th. That was out for pretty much almost all of Missouri. Much of the east central plains and middle Mississippi River Valley is expected to be relatively free of convection. Any of you who are versed in Missouri severe weather knows that that almost never happens. We almost always see morning storms left over from the storms that came out of the west, and usually that tempers a lot of severe weather potential in Missouri. However, we are expecting, or they were expecting at this point, no precipitation in there, which allows the atmosphere to charge up really when the sun starts coming out, which could kind of supercharge that atmosphere. Supercells could become fairly numerous by late Sunday afternoon, particularly from parts of eastern Kansas through Missouri, and a few tornadoes appear likely, some of which could become strong. Here is the general surface map setup. Early in the morning, a warm front was starting to push on through Missouri. In southeastern Missouri, there was some hail from some elevated thunderstorms that moved along the warm front. A couple of severe thunderstorm watches were out there. That warm front kind of generally lifted into Illinois as a cold front started to push into Missouri, providing a more prime environment for some supercells and some severe weather into Missouri that afternoon. So eventually the SPC was gaining a little bit more confidence in severe weather potential, so they upgraded parts of southeastern Missouri to a moderate risk of severe weather that day with an enhanced tornado potential really south of St. Louis over parts of southeastern Missouri. The SPC mentions in their forecast, while very large hail will be the most common threat, the shear and instability also support tornadoes with the possibility of a couple strong tornadoes by the evening. And then they mentioned that moderate risk was being expanded based on expected greater destabilization, which is basically the atmosphere being charged up more than they originally anticipated by the morning to have that potential for some higher severe weather. So eventually, right around noon, you had the first mesoscale discussion that was issued for parts of southwestern Missouri. And then about an hour later, the first tornado watch of the event was issued for parts of southwestern Missouri. Over here is the probability map. Just going to mention this right now, that the probability map was very experimental in 2006. So there will be some glitches that you will see in this probability map, and I will probably point them out because I think they're kind of funny. But eventually things start to kind of lock and load by the early afternoon. Eventually, the tornado watch was expanded to include most of central and eastern Missouri into parts of Illinois, as those supercells were already starting to develop down over southwestern Missouri. This supercell that moving from through southern parts of Missouri, heading in the direction of southeastern Missouri, this is going to be the supercell to watch for the day, is this one right in here. It was fairly weak throughout the middle parts of the afternoon, which we'll get to in just a moment, but it produced some large hail up to the size of around baseballs and that potential and a couple of smaller tornadoes. So this is the first tornado to touch down that day. It was actually north of the Branson area, time on the ground. And this is how all of the tornado graphs are going to look, by the way. Every tornado is going to have this. The actual velocity signature is right there in between Branson and the town of Merriam Woods. Just some minor branch damage to the north of Branson, but this was an F0, but this was the first of what would eventually become multiple tornadoes that day. Here's the second tornado from the supercell near the town of Van Zant. This is about 50 to 60 miles east of Springfield. This tornado really did not like this person's mobile home because it basically touched down, hit the mobile home, and then it lifted. So don't be in a mobile home during severe weather. This home was not occupied at the time. The person who lived in it actually took shelter, but you can see the velocity couplet there got just strong enough just east of Van Zant to drop that small tornado, which only went about 1/10 of a mile because it just hit that mobile home. So times begin to change by early evening. So a lot of the thunderstorms in the mid-afternoon were only producing large hail, but the strongest low-level mass convergence associated with the intensifying low-level jet is expected across southern Missouri into the Ohio Valley. The reason why we have not had significant tornadoes in the early part of the afternoon was the lower level shear, which really gets that turning of the winds and the lowest levels of the atmosphere to really get that tornado potential, was not particularly strong. We also had higher than optimum LCL heights, which is essentially cloud bases, which is not favorable for tornadoes as well. So we did not have a lot of tornadoes right in there. However, as the Storm Prediction Center begins to note, the strengthening low-level jet will maintain a window for isolated tornadoes this evening, especially as they begin to move into southeastern Missouri. The SPC did not really foresee what was about to occur over southeastern Missouri that evening and into the overnight hours. So as the first tornado watch begins to expire, they issue a new one around 7 o'clock that goes until 2. That's the aforementioned supercell that produced 2 weak tornadoes getting ready to move into southeastern Missouri. And here is where a little bit of that glitch in the probability outlooks come in. The tornado risk with a 30% and just a 5% there. That's something. And then there's nothing down across there as well. This is a fairly low potential watch, except for the high hail probability out of this storm, which I feel like probably should have been higher. The two graphs up here to the right are within 2 hours of each other. This is the significant tornado parameter for southeastern Missouri. This was in the early evening around 7 o'clock. You can see the value of 2, which is significant, but not fairly significant. And then this is as those supercells start to move on through. You can see values up to the 3-4 range. So things are beginning to change in southeastern Missouri. This is the town of Sparta, Illinois. You can see as these supercells are approaching, they are generally out of the south, which is still an environment conducive to tornadoes, but really notice as these supercells start to head in that direction, they are now backing out of the pure southeasterly direction, really adding that kick to produce some of these tornadoes. So here's as this thunderstorms, both of them, we have two supercells. One is right in here. This is going to be the most productive tornado producer, the one that I'm highlighting here. And then there is a second tornado producer right up here to the north that moves just south of Hillsborough in Jefferson County. Both of these are going to produce significant tornadoes before the night is over, and eventually things start to go back down and wane over parts of southeastern Missouri. So this thunderstorm produces its first significant tornado in the middle of Reynolds County, Missouri, which is in between kind of St. Louis and the Arkansas border. This is an F2 tornado that touches down near the town of Lesterville and Centerville, and it moves about 26 miles. So this is a tornado that is on the ground for quite some time. It touches down actually next to a general store that the occupants next door to it supposedly believe that it's haunted. So ghosts probably got to see a good tornado from that thunderstorm right as it touches down right near Highway 21 in parts of Reynolds County. As it eventually moves into parts of Iron County and into the northern parts, this is Madison County, it weakens and lifts. You had mostly trees that were uprooted. The worst damage was done as this thunderstorm crossed right here, and a barn was destroyed near Patterson Mountain. We'll take a look at that picture in just a moment. Right as that tornado begins to lift, that velocity couplet right in there, as this tornado kind of right at its last legs, another circulation develops very quickly and another tornado touches down pretty quickly. This was an F1 tornado that crosses Highway 72. It actually moves kind of to the northwest, snapping trees south. This is Highway 72 that runs into the town of Fredericktown. That next supercell eventually drops a third tornado, and it hits the town of Mine Lamont, which is just north of Fredericktown in Madison County. There's the city of Farmington right there. This is southeast of Farmington. This is an F1 tornado. Mobile homes and barns were damaged in Mine Lamont. Otherwise, it was a lot of tree damage as this thunderstorm moved through, and it lifted just south of Kaufman. So here's some of the images. This is an image from Reynolds County. The picture in the top left, a lot of trees were taken down from this tornado. This image on the top right is from Mine Lamont itself. That is a mobile home that was destroyed and blown onto a Jeep. The bottom right image is another from Mine Lamont as well. Again, a lot of that mobile home damage. And then this on the bottom right, or the bottom left, is a picture from Patterson Mountain with a lot of that tree damage and some kind of debris lofted in the trees over there. So this tornado would have its magnum opus right around 9:20 when it's going to produce an F3 tornado that moves near the town of St. Mary in Chester, Missouri. This is in northern Perry County. The most significant damage occurs in northern Perry County. This tornado moves 54 miles. It touches down right basically where that tornado lifted south of Kaufman, and it goes all the way far into Illinois, north of Carbondale, Illinois. 54 miles in length, and the width was 500 yards, which is between a quarter and a half mile wide. Two people were killed in their car. I'll talk more about them in just a moment. With multiple mobile homes were completely destroyed and tossed 150 yards away from where they were originally sitting. A brick home was leveled as well. And just north of Chester, Missouri, there is a prison that was hit. And that prison, which again, these are these thick stone slab prisons, the prison suffered significant damage as it crossed the river into parts of Illinois. So here's the image of that tornado, very, very strong signature as it moves through the town of St. Mary, and then it crosses the river into parts of northern Illinois. It lifts north of the town of Pinckneyville. So it touches down south of Kaufman, lifting north of Pinckneyville. It is a very long track tornado that moves right through the area of St. Mary, Chester, and this region saw the worst of the damage that day. But just look at some of this damage. These were some of the mobile homes. This was the foundation of a mobile home right in here. These tornado ripped the mobile home clean off its foundation, nothing even standing in that tornado right in there. This is the brick home that was also very level. This is a well-built brick home as well. And then a couple more images of these tornadoes. This is all local, right in the middle of northern Perry County, where that tornado kind of moved on through. The tornado wind speeds in this storm was 170 miles an hour. It's the only tornado I could find wind speed evidence for. And unfortunately, or not unfortunately, that would actually be, if this was in the EF scale, that would be an EF4 tornado today. So this was an EF4 tornado, and Fred Glass from the National Weather Service mentioned that there was likely EF4 tornado, F4 tornado damage, but that was probably already cleaned up. It took them several days to get down into Perry County because they had so much other severe weather to deal with. So this was likely an F4 tornado, or especially today, it would be an EF4 tornado. There was a second supercell that moved on through it, dropped a brief tornado south of Rolla, and then it dropped 3 large tornadoes south of the town of Festus. So there's a brief F0 just west of 55, and then there is an F3 tornado that touches down, crosses Highway 55, and moves into the town of Fultz in parts of Illinois, where an F1 tornado touches down and actually hits the town of Fultz itself. It damages 3 homes in a newly built neighborhood. It damages 3 homes, and it snaps 2 tension wires as it crosses the Mississippi River. The tornado lifted before Fultz, but then a third tornado touched down, moved into the Fultz, causing damage to its water tower. Moved on through. Here are some pictures. This is one of the homes in that new neighborhood, suffered significant damage. Another one of those mobile homes that was hit pretty hard, and then some more damage. Right in the back over there, that's one of those high tension towers that was snapped in half by a tornado. Those things are very difficult to snap. That, along with this home damage, is what gave it its F3 rating. So at this point, Fred Glass, who was working at the National Weather Service that night, we're getting reports of a tornado crossing Interstate 55. Now, do you see the issue that is occurring at this point? Is that we have 2 tornadoes getting ready to simultaneously cross Interstate 55. So they kept getting reports of, we have a tornado on Interstate 55, but they were never giving mile markers. So it was a level of confusion to which tornado was crossing I-55 at the same time, because both of them were crossing I-55 at the same time. Here is the tornado kind of damage paths from here. So really that localization, these 2 F3s were on the ground at the same time, both of which crossed into Illinois at the same time. And this one lifted well before that one did, as it moved into parts of Illinois. So as the National Weather Service was just getting cleaned up from that event, they had to look towards the next severe weather event. As they woke up that morning on March the 11th, a high risk for severe weather was issued over parts of Missouri, Illinois, and Iowa, with a 30% tornado risk. Much of East Central Plains and Mid-Mississippi River Valley are expected to be free of convection. We've already talked about that a little bit earlier. Deep layer shear will be more than sufficient for supercells, with initial activity likely being discrete, with the chance of significant tornadoes all across parts of Missouri that day. It was a volatile day, the day after March the 11th into the morning of March the 12th. So the setup in the morning was, we have a warm front. This was the cold front from yesterday that stalls over southern Missouri and begins to lift north as a warm front. It was roughly south of Interstate 70 by the morning hours. This was at 6 in the morning here. You can see already a prime environment over parts of southern Missouri. We have temperatures in the mid-60s, dew points in the lower 60s, and those surface winds coming out of the southeast from this event. But pay special attention to these surface boundaries right up here to the north. Kansas City and up to the north, we have temperatures in the 40s and dew points in the 30s. Any forecaster or anybody that would look at this would think that there's not going to be a tornado chance in this environment, right? Well, they would be wrong, because we have a supercell develop about 100 miles north of the warm front that drops 5 tornadoes as it's moving through northern Missouri in an atmosphere of 40-degree temperatures and 30-degree dew points. This tornado, 5 different tornadoes touched down from this supercell that crosses the entire state length of Missouri, well north of the warm front. So it impacts the Kansas City metropolitan area first. And we have very large hail up to the size of around baseballs in Kansas City at this point, with right along this edge right in here, this little boundary, this little outflow boundary that pushes on through, that has 80-mile-an-hour winds with it as it's heading into the Kansas City metro. This causes significant damage in a lot of places. The Great Wolf Lodge, which is a hotel/water park from Kansas City, it's in Kansas City, Kansas, had its glass sunroof broken in. There was a plane at the KCI airport that was blown off of its runway into a hangar, and large hail reports damaged other airplanes at KCI, as well as the storm moved through the Kansas City metropolitan area very early in the morning. This is around 7, 8 o'clock in the morning as these storms move right through the Kansas City metro. Here's a couple of the areas of the damage. Semis were overturned. This is on 435 in Kansas City, and a warehouse facility collapsed kind of in on itself. And down here, it's just a picture of people having fun at the Great Wolf Lodge. I could not find a picture of that skylight broken, so we have to use our imaginations and imagine that skylight no longer there because I could not find a picture of it. So eventually the storm would actually drop and produce 5 weak tornadoes. The first one was an F1 that hit the town of Orick. A gas station was destroyed and the roof of Orick High School was blown off. A second tornado touched down and moved through the town of Carrollton, Missouri. It was a longer track tornado, about 10 miles. It moved through Carrollton, kind of damaging some buildings, trees, and homes, but it was only an F0. Another tornado touched down in Randolph County, north of the town of Moberly. Remember the county, Randolph County, because we're going to come back to it later on in this entire case study. About 10 miles. A fifth tornado touched down in an open field, just blew around some trees. And then finally, the final tornado passed over a pond before damaging an outbuilding on a farm. So these tornadoes really don't like isolated buildings in the middle of nowhere, apparently. That thunderstorm weakened as it crossed parts of the Mississippi River, but eventually that dry line over parts of eastern Kansas was getting ready to explode. With that high risk still in effect for parts of Missouri, supercells would really start to take off around early afternoon. We have that supercharged atmosphere. The warm front has lifted to the north, still have those winds out of the southeast, temperatures in the lower 70s with dew points in the lower 60s, with that warm front sitting right near Interstate 70. Interstate 70 is going to be very important for this next series, for this next part of these tornadoes here. This is the first SPC outlook that was issued, talking about how a volatile situation could develop as that dry line would fire thunderstorms in parts of Kansas and Oklahoma. And eventually, a particularly dangerous situation tornado watch would be issued from eastern Kansas into Illinois. This is a huge PDS tornado watch that includes most of Missouri. You can see a couple of those supercells just north of the warm front, with eventually some of that development, as I'm highlighting right here with my cursor, just near Ponca City. That's that development along the dry line that's going to start to break out. This is where I mentioned the probability tables are a little bit broken. Notice how we have all of these high probabilities, and then the combined severe hail wind probability is less than 2%, which I don't think they would issue that high probabilities and then say actually no severe weather is going to happen at all out of this particularly dangerous situation tornado watch. So eventually that dry line starts to fire in eastern Kansas, and it develops into 3 separate supercells that's going to move out of eastern Kansas and into Missouri. And this supercell is going to cross over the Kansas City metro. These 2 supercells are going to be the most important supercells probably of the entire day. As they cross into parts of western Missouri, they're going to start to produce tornadoes right in that zone near Sedalia. That's going to be a significant moniker right in there. So the first supercell moved over parts of the Kansas City metro. After they were just destroyed by that damage in the early morning round, they have a supercell thunderstorm that moved right over downtown Kansas City. This was producing funnel clouds, according to the chopper footage, right over the top of downtown. Once again, this is another example of a great photo that I would love to show you, but unfortunately, there's no evidence of that photo. So we get this warning report. Television helicopter footage showed a funnel cloud and rotating wall cloud with a very severe thunderstorm over Kansas City, Kansas, moving east at around 45 miles an hour. That storm would eventually not produce a tornado, but these 2 supercells would eventually produce multiple tornadoes as they crossed through the entire state of Missouri. So as they move into parts of central Missouri and into northeastern Missouri, these 2 supercells are going to continue moving into Illinois, through central Illinois, into the town of Springfield, Illinois. And the loop stops here, but these supercells continue into Indiana and even into parts of southern Michigan. To this day, I have to check the records, but to this day, this is the longest track supercell in United States history, running from northern Oklahoma to southern Michigan. And we're going to take a look at that in a little bit more detail in a minute. So the SPC was especially watching this as they were crossing that warm frontal boundary, remains very favorable for rotating storms, and they continued along with that as it was approaching parts of the Mississippi River. So the first tornado that would touch down from this event was a tornado near the town of Windsor. This is southwest of Sedalia, around 50 to 60 miles south and east of Kansas. This was an F1 tornado. Was on the ground for about 15 minutes. I don't know the length or the width from this, but this downed some trees, and some farm buildings. And a little interlude here. This is the town of Green Ridge. There is a Mizzou alum who I believe is actually listening into this right now, who was in this, who lives in Green Ridge. He is now works at the National Weather Service in North Platte. His name's Caleb Brown. He was taking shelter in a church this day, and he was taking shelter in their church basement. Softball-sized hail moved through the town of Green Ridge, and the thing he can remember the most is hearing those glass windows shattering in the town of Green Ridge as this storm moved on through. The tornado itself would stay to the south, but as that hail would move right over the Green Ridge area, that would be softball-sized hail right in the middle of Green Ridge, and it actually sparked Caleb's interest in meteorology. So a little bit of a silver lining in an otherwise particularly bad day. So the most significant tornado out of this supercell is actually going to touch down and move just south of Sedalia. Sedalia is a larger town in west central Missouri. It's kind of in between Kansas City and St. Louis on Highway 50, which is south of Interstate 70 right in here. This is an F2 tornado that moved just south of Sedalia and approaching the town of Smithton. Luckily, we actually get to see some footage of this in a moment. This is the only videographed tornado and the only photographed tornado of the entire day. A tornado emergency was issued for Pettis County, which is the county that Sedalia is in. Storm spotters are tracking a large and extremely dangerous half-mile wide tornado. This was headed for the town of Sedalia by around 4:20 p.m. And here's actually some video of the tornado. So I'm going to shut up now for a second and let you watch it. This is from Zach Paul, who was chasing at this point 2006. Today, he is the chief meteorologist at KRCG, which is Channel 13 in Jefferson City.
Thank you.
It is, isn't it?
It's coming this way.
It is. What's that constant roar behind us? Yep, it's getting bigger.
Yep. Okay, I appreciate it. All right, thank you.
It's getting bigger, and you're right, it is coming this way.
It's coming this way.
I think we need to go ahead and move.
I agree. There go. Oh, look, man, this inflow is incredible.
I know, it's getting worse.
Yeah, this is awesome.
You guys called this right, man.
You guys called this exactly right.
Look at the debris. Well, that's a bird, never mind. Okay.
Oh, it's sticking to the ground right now. Beautiful.
Can you see it on the ground?
No, it dipped, but now it's going back up. There it goes again. It's dipping down again. It's too far away. It's too far. Oh, look at that. Oh, that's funny.
So this is a still image from another storm chaser of the day of that tornado as it was about at its peak strength just south of Sedalia. But some people, though, it moved south of Sedalia, so the actual town itself was not affected, but Sedalia got crushed by that same hail that we mentioned that hit Caleb a little bit earlier. This is around baseball-sized hail. This is some of the damage pictures from Sedalia. Mobile homes are not a safe place. Look at what this home was sitting on. It was sitting above on cinder blocks. So very easily, this could have even just been straight line winds because those winds could probably get underneath that mobile home pretty easily and take it and just lift it and throw it down. This is another kind of a wooden framed kind of barn shed that collapsed onto a couple of tractors because we're near Sedalia. Another one of these houses lost its roof and a lot of its siding. And then this guy also lost parts of his home. You can see the blinds are kind of broken out of the window. As the storm moved just south of Sedalia, didn't go through the town of Sedalia itself, but Sedalia has a very storied tornado history. This was one of the more significant ones to move through the area. You can also see in a scene reminiscent of Twister, one of these water main pipes were bent out of its place. The bolts were broken and it was bent. So don't hook yourself to a leather strap to these things because you will not cleanly fly up into the tornado, unfortunately for Bill and Joe. So the tornadoes kind of continue. A smaller tornado touches down near the town of Smithton. It was an F1 tornado. It traveled near Highway 50. It damaged a home before it lifted, but it was a fairly large tornado too by the standards of what we've been dealing with so far. And then finally, another tornado touched down near the town of Otterville. This is just east of Sedalia. These happened kind of one after the other. And this would actually be the last tornado that would touch down out of this supercell for quite a while as it approached the Columbia area. So this is a hail picture from Boonville, right off of Interstate 70 in Boonville from that northern storm that kind of moved on through. You see just a lot of hail. That was the main thing, was that this hail was large and there was a lot of it. It almost looks like we're looking at snow right off of Interstate 70. It's a lot of that hail kind of piled up right in Boone County. So there was a supercell just to the north of that Sedalia storm. Those supercells were kind of moving in a parallel track to each other. The northern one produced a couple of tornadoes too. This is the town of Amsterdam. This is the Kansas border. This thicker kind of black line about 50 miles south of Kansas City. An F0 tornado moved through the town of Amsterdam. It just caused a couple of weak damage to some buildings and some trees as it moved on through. The second tornado there's that second supercell coming into Sedalia. This is as those first tornadoes were touching down. A second tornado touched down near the town of Hughesville and crossed Interstate 70. There's a town called Blackwater, which sits kind of right at this little black line and where 70 interacts right in there. This was an F0, but when it crossed Interstate 70, it blew over a tractor trailer. So again, do not drive out in tornadoes. Do not drive on a highway out in these tornadoes because those tornadoes can blow things over, especially those high profile vehicles like a tractor trailer. A lot of surface area for that wind to hit. Doesn't even take that strong of winds to knock over some of these tractor trailers right as it moved over Interstate 70. This was a mobile home which was lifted and thrown around 50 yards away. This was near the town of Blackwater. You can see that mobile home was destroyed. Their occupants had fled that home for the safety of a storm shelter in Boonville. And finally, a third tornado touchdown near the town of Fayette. For reference, Columbia would be just off of the screen to the southeast right in there. This is over Howard County, Missouri. Storm spotters observed this tornado, but there wasn't really a lot of damage to correlate with the tornado, just a few kind of snap trees. So this would just become an F0. So here's as these thunderstorms started to move over Columbia proper. So this is the second day of some very large hail for Columbia. This one likely produced baseball-sized hail as well. And actually, there are 3 personal connections out of the supercells that moved through Columbia. Dr. Fox, who lived in here at this point, had to get his roof replaced by hail. He estimated that the hail size was over 3 inches in diameter from this storm. But Dr. Fox only had to get his roof replaced. Dr. Lupo, who lives in the northern part of town at this time, had to replace not only his roof, but his siding as well. And he sent me an email this morning that was basically like his mood went from, wow, this hail is cool, to, oh, S word, it's hitting the siding. And we had to do something about it. He didn't say it broke any of the windows. He was shocked that it did not break windows, but both Dr. Fox and Dr. Lupo had to replace some of their homes as the supercell moved on through. And Professor Aldrich, who worked at KOMU at this time. God bless his soul during this event. He was driving home to Carrollton, Illinois, to go home for the weekend because he doesn't work on weekends. It was just about a 3-hour drive from Columbia. Got all the way home, and essentially the weekend meteorologist called him up and said, "Hey, you need to come back. We're expecting an outbreak of severe weather." And he came all the way back. I would be very frustrated if that happened, but he came back and he worked through this weekend event. Apparently, as this storm was moving fairly close to the KOMU station, a lot of the non-personnel actually had to go into a shelter, which if you've ever been inside KOMU, there's really no such thing as a shelter. There's this little like basement kind of thing that's not really a basement, but it's like a little lower level that's not protective at all. But luckily, though, a tornado never actually touched down out of this thunderstorm. It just gave Columbia 2 days of very large hail. So this is a photo that was sent to the National Weather Service. This was a truck driver off of Interstate 61 who took this picture as it was moving into Columbia. And you see that little darkened area right in there. Well, Fred Glass and the rest of the National Weather Service team also looked at that, and they believed that that was a large tornado on the ground headed for Columbia. And it certainly looks like that. When they started doing the storm survey, though, this actually turns out that there was no damage in this area. He knew exactly where this would have been, and there was absolutely no damage in the area. So this likely was not a tornado. This is likely some sort of a hail shaft that is giving the impression of a tornado heading into Columbia. And in fact, Fred Glass told me that for their severe weather presentations, their spotter training presentations for a while, they used this picture as kind of the false tornado kind of thing, because this definitely looks like a tornado, but they would use it as, is this a tornado? Is this not a tornado? No, it's just rain curtains, but it is really hard to tell from this photograph. And it still perplexes Fred Glass to this day. Here's a picture of some of the hail outside of Columbia as it was melting. A lot of street flooding there as well. You can see some leftover hailstones, but there's also a lot of fog. As the hail started to melt, a lot of cold air right at the surface, but still very warm right above the surface. So you have what is known as hail fog that develops, which is a dense layer of fog that's about as high as a person stands that kind of blanketed Columbia after the storm we've gone through. It's definitely a very eerie scene in Columbia after the second day of very, very large hail that moved gone through. So this tornado, these pairs of supercells did not produce a tornado near Columbia, but they started to produce tornadoes again as they moved into parts of eastern Missouri. A smaller tornado touched down on the northern supercell north of Mexico, Missouri, in between Mexico and Santa Fe, Missouri. There's Centralia. Centralia is about 20 miles to the northeast of Columbia, which is down across there. And there's that southern supercell as it would produce golf ball sized hail in the city of Mexico itself. That was an F0. And the final tornado from this storm touched down in the town of Bowling Green, which is about 40 miles northwest of St. Louis, right in here. A small tornado touched down, 2 of them actually touched down near the community of Ashley, right in this thunderstorm. And this supercell up here to the north is actually starting to weaken. As these storms cross the Mississippi River, that northern supercell actually gets absorbed into the southern supercell, and the southern supercell becomes the more dominant one as it moves into parts of Illinois. Believe it or not, out of all that we've talked about, those have not even been the main event yet. The main event's going to come in the evening, right in here. So the Storm Prediction Center was already forecasting a warm sector environment that is very favorable for supercells with large hail, tornadic potential. There's a possibility for an enhanced tornado threat as storms interact with an outflow boundary, which is highlighted in the blue across west central Missouri that was left behind by those initial supercells moving on through. You can see the warm front is up in northern Missouri at this point, but notice how, if you look here at Columbia, that supercell only moved through an hour before, 76-degree temperature, 58-degree dew point. So that supercell did almost nothing to the atmosphere of Columbia and to the atmosphere of the rest of these stations out across here as the next round of supercells would fire. And then this is the significant tornado parameter really beginning to kick on into the overnight hours as more supercells are going to start to develop. A second PDS tornado watch is issued as the first one actually expired at 9. This one goes until 4 o'clock in the morning. At this point, the supercell that produced the tornado in Sedalia is producing a tornado in Springfield. And notice more supercells lining up in parts of western Missouri. And just look at how large this PDS tornado watch is. Joplin to Chicago was underneath this PDS tornado watch with, again, very high probabilities from the Storm Prediction Center. Here's a brief little radar recap of the next wave of supercells that starts to develop over western Missouri. Kansas City is right where the cursor is, as these supercells originally kind of had to compete for a lot of its influence, and eventually isolated supercells start to develop out of the area. This is the kind of second wave of the day as they're starting to move into parts of central Missouri. See the squall line out in here? That's round 3 that's going to come on in. And something very curious is going to happen with round 3 as the squall line breaks into supercells itself. There's a supercell. There's a supercell near the lake. There's another supercell down by Springfield. Fred Glass, when he was talking to me about this, says that he has never seen this before. Almost sent. It has been very rare that a squall line that develops along the cold front breaks up into supercells as it devolves into supercells as we move into the overnight hours as these storms eventually get into St. Louis. It's something that he still doesn't even understand why it happened today. This is still kind of one of those mysteries from March the 12th that not even Fred Glass can really understand, is that squall line in the back actually produces more tornadoes as we get closer to St. Louis. So real quickly, a tornado touchdown in far, far northeastern Missouri. Moving on. So here's the first supercell of the night as it was moving southeast of Kansas City. There's Sedalia again. Now, a lot of interesting supercells happened this night, but this arguably to me is the most impressive supercell of the night. We're going to get to why in just a moment. Moves to the town of Warrensburg. Columbia barely pops up on the screen. There it goes. And as it moves up, there's the town of Hannibal right in there. So this tornado moves, this supercell moves through all of parts of Missouri. So the first tornado that touches down is a brief tornado north of Knob Noster, which is Whiteman Air Force Base. That's basically between St. Louis and Kansas City. There's our old friend Sedalia, which sits right in the far southeastern part of the screen as more supercells kind of move right over that general area. This next tornado was a tornado that moved through the town of Sweet Springs. An unfortunate incident happened when this storm crossed Interstate 70. There are 6 people. All 6 of them suffered major injuries. You should never take shelter under an overpass in a tornado. It is a very, very dangerous thing. You are putting your life more at risk under an overpass than you would not being under an overpass. And as these 6 people learned the lesson the hard way, luckily no one of them were actually killed. But this tornado touched down, hit the town of Sweet Springs, and went just south of Marshall, producing tree damage. So here's where things get a little bit interesting out of this supercell. This is an F3 near the town of Glasgow, which sits right there. This is northwest of Columbia. Columbia is just off of the screen. Rocheport sits right there. So this tornado touches down as the previous tornado is occluding. So the previous tornado south of Marshall, where the cursor is, and another tornado touches down as this one is lifting. So there are 2 tornadoes on the ground at once. This tornado lifts, and then this tornado continues into parts of eastern. This is Saline County. As it moves into eastern Saline County, you have a satellite tornado, which is a little kind of baby tornado that kind of is influenced by the main tornado, develops near the town of Nelson and raced into this tornado. It is a satellite tornado that was absorbed into the F3 tornado. Storm spotters who were there reported it looked like a significant F5 tornado, 2 F5 tornadoes from the town of Heston Gosel in Kansas from March 13th, 1990. So almost 16 years later, almost to the day, another tornado looks very similar to that. And as those 2 tornadoes merged together, that tornado touchdown became much stronger and produced the F3 damage to a farmstead just north of Arrow Rock. So these are the only other tornado pictures that we will actually get to see. The photos on the left are from the Sweet Springs, Nelson, Marshall area from a storm chaser. This is actually from Richard Tees, the one who filmed the footage from Sedalia. You can see that's the parent tornado right in there. There's that satellite tornado that's getting ready to race into this tornado. So the footage that we're about to look at on the right, because we don't actually have footage from this event of these tornadoes merging, I thought it would be fun to speculate and see what it looked like. So the footage on the right is actually from the Heston Gosel, Kansas tornado, right as those tornadoes merged right in there. That is the original F5 tornado that was moving into the area. That's the new F5 tornado that's developing right in there. This one's going to merge in with that one right in there. I know probably all of you were thinking this was a much cooler event. Why didn't we cover this event? There's that tornado as it's crossing in front of the larger tornado. there it's now passing off to the east. It's now caught up in that circulation. These were two separate tornadoes. There's that circulation. Pretend this is that satellite of zero. So there it goes as it goes into the storm. And then notice how it takes this hard turn back to the right just a moment. Kind of stalls right in there. And then there goes that tornado that's about to get sucked into this large hole. It stalls for a moment as this one starts to develop. There's that tornado as it is lifting into that tornado right in there. This is probably, not exactly, but that's probably what this was doing in the photo on the left over here. And then right at this point, this tornado enhanced into the F5 intensity right in there. So this, I believe, is probably the most interesting supercell. In fact, that we had probably at this point could have been 3 tornadoes on the ground at the same time from this tornado in parts of Saline County. So there's fascinating stuff coming out from there. Here's some of the damage from Eastern Saline County. I found this off of a blog post from Marshall, Missouri, the Marshall News. Here is a mobile home, which was destroyed in the tornado, but luckily the American flag still stood out in front of the home. Some metal siding was wrapped around a tree, which is very strong winds can do that. And look at these pieces of woods that are just punctured into the side, like somebody just took it and just kind of jammed it in there. So that is on the side of a church in parts of Eastern Saline County. This is what looks like on the other side of that wall. This is that same church. You can see this is actually their grand piano that they once had at the church that is destroyed and broken out over here. Right in the background, there's actually a table of Bibles that still somehow survived this tornado as it moved on over. And then here's that same image of the church on the north side with, once again, a destroyed Bible in the bottom of the screen. So this tornado, though, was actually not, this supercell was not done. It's thought to produce 2 other significant tornadoes. This one is an F3 that moves through the town of Rennick. Rennick is a very small town of around 100 people south of Moberly. Columbia is outside of the screen. Columbia is about 20 miles south of where this tornado is moving. This was an F3, 20-mile width. This, unfortunately, was the deadliest tornado of the day. 4 people were killed when it struck their mobile home and a sturdy house near Rennick. 13 people were also injured when a bus transporting college students was overturned. I am not aware of the circumstances surrounding the college student bus, but all of them survived as the tornado blew their bus, I presume, off of Highway 63. Now, if you are somebody who pays attention to the news at all, Rennick is actually popped up in the news very recently because their tornado siren went down. Their tornado siren has went out of commission, so they have actually started a GoFundMe to try to raise money to get a new tornado siren in the city of Rennick. And they use this specific tornado as an example of what can happen if they don't have that proper warning, because Rennick was hit. Those 4 people were killed in the town of Rennick. I will send out the GoFundMe in the group chat later, and there is a link to it at the end of this presentation that if you want to donate to them, you can help them get a tornado siren and warn the people in Rennick so something like this doesn't happen again. So here's some of the damage from this. This middle image is unfortunately a home, that sturdy home where a woman was killed in the home. We don't know the circumstances of why, but she was probably not in her basement. Here's some of these mobile homes that were just completely destroyed and kind of thrown into its own little rubble pile as it was overturned and destroyed. And then here is an entire second floor of a home that is broken off with only like a chair that is remaining in perfect condition right in there. This is the town. This is from Rennick itself. So the supercell was not done yet because it was going to produce its strongest tornado and the strongest tornado of the entire outbreak right in here. This is up in Monroe County, which is east of Moberly near the town of Paris. Any of you who've been to Mark Twain Lake is in Monroe County. It is right there where I'm circling here with my cursor. There was an F4 tornado that touched down, moved just north of the town of Paris, and it hit the town of Monroe City. This is the strongest tornado of the day. At its peak, one very well-built home was completely destroyed. A car was lofted down the street of one home, thrown about 200 yards into the living room of another home, and the home only had one wall remaining afterwards. But the tornado weakens as it moves into Monroe City, but it causes some significant damage to a church in Monroe City as it kind of moved into the area. So there's that church in Monroe City that suffers some significant damage right there. It was kind of one of those church school kind of complexes there. And then here is damage of the gas station that has been completely leveled by this tornado as it moved through Monroe City. There are some photos that I was not able to put into this presentation because I got them fairly late, of trees that were not only snapped, but like uprooted and turned upside its head, driven into the ground in parts of northern Monroe County as well. So very, very damaging stuff in Monroe County. This is the strongest tornado of the night, and not even the last tornado of the night. So here's the second supercell. We're going to kind of hop down the line a little bit. The second supercell crosses into Missouri near the town of Butler, which is about 50 miles south of Kansas City, and it moves roughly in a similar track of those first couple of tornadoes right in there. So it moves through the town of Sedalia, and it moves just north of Columbia, all the way up into Monroe County before it finally weakens near the town of Paris. So here's the first tornado that touches down actually within the city limits of Butler. And as it moves off here to the north, it gets to the town of Urich, which is in between Harrisonville and Clinton, about 50-ish miles to the southeast of Kansas City and about 20 miles to the south of Warrensburg. It began in the city of Butler. Unfortunately, there was one fatality occurred when a well-built home was destroyed in Urich. The tornado continues. Another tornado touches down just south of Whiteman Air Force Base, which is a military base in Missouri, in between the towns of Warrensburg and our old friend Sedalia. Once again, this tornado goes north of Green Ridge. So Caleb probably still went to a shelter in a church, but was not pummeled by softball-sized hail at this point. This is a significant tornado as it was moving just south of Whiteman Air Force Base. The military personnel were actually outside. I don't know why they were outside. They were getting pummeled by hail, but they were, and they actually saw this tornado with the power flashes as it was moving south of Whiteman Air Force Base, which is sitting right there on the screen. It was about 13 miles, 300 yards. This was an F2 tornado that moved just south of Whiteman. And that was the last tornado that touched down out of that one. There was an unconfirmed tornado report northeast of Sedalia from these same storm chasers that had the footage from the Marshall tornado a little bit earlier, but that was never confirmed by the National Weather Service. So jumping down a little bit more, here is the next supercell that is developed that is moving over southwestern Missouri, the Lake of the Ozarks, Jefferson City, and eventually north of St. Louis near the town of Troy, and it continues all the way into Springfield, Illinois. So this begins in Kansas, and just a quick note, notice how all of these supercells have had incredibly long tracks with them. These have not just gone a couple of counties and have dissipated. These are going states, whole states. These supercells are moving on through and producing tornadoes constantly. This one that we're about to talk about now, this was actually the most prolific tornado producer of the night, was this supercell. This will produce, I think, 6 or 7 different tornadoes as it crosses through parts of Missouri and into parts of Illinois. So the first tornado to touch down was in El Dorado Springs, which is in between Kansas City and Springfield, a little bit closer to the Springfield side, east of the town of Nevada. This tornado was an F2 tornado. It went 38 miles. This tornado moved just south of the town of El Dorado Springs, but it produced significant damage to many homes in the area. Then the tornado touched down once more just north of the Lake of the Ozarks in the town of Gravois Mills, which is just south of Versailles in Morgan County. The Lake of the Ozarks sits right in there. So this is the little arm of the lake that goes up towards Gravois Mills. The town took a direct hit by the F2 tornado. Zach Paul, who was working at KRCG as the morning meteorologist at this time, was sent down to Gravois Mills, and he was talking to some of the people there who had a belief that the hill and the lake would protect them from a tornado when it came on over, which they found out that night that it did not. And unfortunately, it luckily did not kill anybody as it moved about 6 miles through the town of Gravois Mills itself. The storm actually moved directly over Jefferson City. It produced a funnel cloud that apparently a camera at the Capitol caught it going right over the Capitol building. Apparently, it almost scraped the statue on top of the Capitol building. But unfortunately, there's no photo or video of it, so we're going to have to just take testimony from it. But this is southeast of Fulton. Columbia is sitting off to the screen in the northwest. This is a F1 tornado that basically kind of follows the Missouri River near the towns of Mocaine, Chamois, and Portland. It went about 17 miles. It just kind of crossed the Missouri multiple times. Tree damage occurred while one mobile home was flipped over. Another tornado touched down near the town of Portland. This is southeastern Callaway County, right after the previous one did. Montgomery City sits just off to the north, and this is Interstate 70. We are between Columbia and St. Louis right now. 6 miles. It damaged a home along Highway 94 near Portland. Otherwise, it was just a lot of tree damage. That was noted as the storm moved in the direction of New Florence. And right after midnight, an F3 tornado touches down in the city of Jonesburg. This is about 30 to 40 miles west of St. Louis right now. The town of Warrenton is right in there, which is kind of the last smaller city you get to before you get into the St. Louis metro when you hit Wentzville. This was an F3 tornado that moved over Interstate 70. It damaged a porta potty factory in the area, which suffered major damage. A tractor trailer was blown off Interstate 70, and a woman suffered major injuries when her mobile home was tipped over right just north of Jonesburg, right in here. The tornado continued in the general direction of Hawk Point in Troy, but it lifted right before then. Here's some of the damage. This highway sign near Jonesburg, which I drive by every time I have to come back into Columbia from St. Louis. This highway sign was snapped in two right in there. And then this was the mobile home where the woman suffered major injuries in as it was kind of blown over. The home is actually off the screen. This was kind of her little carport garage right in here that fell and then was slid off of its foundation a little bit, exposing that car right in there. This was an F3 that touched down in Jonesburg just after midnight. So these storms are still producing significant tornadoes even well into the overnight hours. This is early March. Darkness falls around 6 o'clock. So it's been dark for around 6 hours, and we're still getting significant tornadoes moving right through the area. So here's the next supercell down the line. This is supercell J that I have labeled. By the way, I've labeled all of these by number. This storm weakens right before it gets to the Lake of the Ozarks, or right around when it gets to the Lake of the Ozarks, but it does produce a couple of tornadoes. It produces a long track F0 tornado that moves about 40 miles through 5 different counties. It touches down here just off to the southeast of Lamar, and it continues to kind of move through just south of Stockton into the town of Humansville, and it lifts just before it gets to the town of Hermitage. This is a 40-mile F0 tornado, so it kind of busts the myth that weaker tornadoes tend to move shorter distances, because this one went 40 miles. I don't know the wind speeds of it. I wonder if it would get an upgrade if we were to look at it in the EF scale, but it produced a lot of sporadic tree damage. But the Weather Service in Springfield felt that it's significant enough to issue a tornado emergency for the city of Stockton. They were tracking a confirmed tornado or a conformed tornado. This dangerous storm was located 11 miles southwest of Stockton, moving to the northeast at around 50 miles an hour. It missed Stockton to the south, right in there. The next tornado was an F3 tornado that hit the town, or went just south of the town of Hermitage. Hermitage is a town just west of the Lake of the Ozarks. The Lake of the Ozarks is off the screen to the right. It went over this little lake right in here. It suffered the Pomme de Terre, I know I butchered that French, Lake Dam, and a neighborhood known as Carson's Corner, which is kind of a very touristy, vacation-y kind of neighborhood, suffered significant damage near Hermitage as well. As a lot of those vacation homes were heavily damaged. And then here is another supercell. This is one that's actually going to move through the Springfield metro area, producing a large tornado in Springfield itself. This supercell moves from the town just south of Joplin, Missouri to around Rolla, Missouri. So Joplin's right in there. It's already off the screen. Here's the Springfield areas. The storm's moving right on through there. And then it continues into the Joplin area before finally weakening as we get towards around 1 and 2 o'clock in the morning. So 2 tornadoes touched down in the town of Neosho. There's actually 2 circulations. There's the stronger circulation to the southeast, and then there's the smaller circulation in the back. You can see right there where the velocity image shows a small couplet moving right over the town of Neosho. That is a small tornado, or Neosho, I should actually say. The tornado developed on the back circulation, minor structure damage in Neosho. A turkey farm was destroyed, and unfortunately, several turkeys were killed in it. A second tornado also briefly touches down in a neighborhood in Neosho. And then here is an F3 tornado that moves through the town of Springfield, right around 10 to 11, 40-mile length. So a lot of these are long track storms. The tornado is at its strongest between the towns of Billings and Cleaver, Missouri, which is right in here. This is F3 damage where several well-built homes were severely damaged. An elderly man was killed in Marionville, a little bit southwest of the strongest area when debris hit him. He was actually, we think he was actually outside running towards his shelter. He had a shelter at this point, and the debris hit him and unfortunately killed him on his way over to the shelter. The tornado weakened as it moved into South Springfield, but the track was very similar to the May 4th, 2003 tornado. So here is that radar image, and look at that velocity couplet right as it moves into the Billings and Cleaver areas. That is a strong velocity couplet as it moved on through there. This is an F3 tornado. Again, one of those where the damage from what I was reading was so significant that I wonder if it was today, this could have been an EF4 tornado. I unfortunately do not have the wind speeds out of that tornado to actually confirm it though. The National Weather Service decided that was also a significant tornado, so a tornado emergency came out for the southern section of Springfield and Greene County. Large and extremely dangerous tornado located near Battlefield, moving east at 45 miles an hour. It actually weakened as it moved into South Springfield. They only had F1 damage, but still, Springfield issued 2 tornado emergencies that night. And that's not even half of the tornado emergencies they're going to issue tonight. So here's as the tornado immediately lifts in Springfield, and about 30 seconds later, another tornado touches down, which makes me wonder, and talking about the tornado track, it makes me wonder if this could just be the same tornado that just maybe skipped just a little bit, but it moves into Webster County, which is the county just east of Springfield. This is Interstate 44 right in there. This is an F2 tornado. Significant damage to homes were found in this area south of Marshfield. And the National Weather Service in Springfield went ahead and continued that tornado emergency into the rural portions of southern Webster County as a train spotter reported a tornado in that area. Then immediately after that tornado touches down, an F3 tornado touches down, hitting the town of Grove Spring. This is the town of Lebanon right in here, which is right along Interstate 44 between St. Louis and Springfield. This F3 tornado touches down in parts of Webster County, and it moves northeast through the town of Grove Spring and eventually near the town of Competition before it finally lifts. And then this entire supercell lifts as it gets close to Rolla. And again, the National Weather Service in Springfield issued another tornado emergency for that thunderstorm as it was moving into the city of Duncan, large, extremely dangerous tornado. And finally, this is the last supercell right in here of this next line. This actually began in eastern Oklahoma, moving over the town of Bentonville, Arkansas, before heading into the Branson area where it produced baseball-sized hail in Branson. This storm would actually produce only one tornado in Missouri, but this supercell would continue all the way closer to Cape Girardeau. There's our old friend Reynolds County as it's moving on through. And as it gets closer to Springfield in the Jackson, Missouri area, it finally weakens at around 9Z, which we were talking, this is 3-4 o'clock in the morning. There's Perryville. Again, this is the same area that we talked about, felt like 5 years ago at this point, those tornadoes that we were talking about probably about an hour ago at this point. And F1 tornado crosses the border of Arkansas and Missouri as it is heading, there's Branson right in there. Silver Dollar City sits about right in there. Silver Dollar City has a lot of those tents, those kind of pavilions that were up. All of them suffered damage from this hailstorm as it moved on through. So Silver Dollar City had to clean up a lot. Same thing with Branson. A lot of businesses and homes in Branson were damaged by this hail as it moved on through. This is an F1 tornado as it crossed into heading towards Table Rock Lake right in there, which you might know Table Rock Lake for the infamous duck boat accident that happened about 8 years after this tornado moved on through. So they are no strangers to thunderstorms or tornadoes or even straight line winds in this area. But the National Weather Service in Springfield did what they have been doing basically the entire night, and they issue a tornado emergency for the Table Rock Lake area and eventually into Branson as they are tracking an extremely dangerous tornado near Grandview, moving east at around 45 miles an hour. This did not actually make it to Table Rock Lake this weekend before, and it was only an F1 tornado at that point. So those were the end of those supercellular tornadoes. So in eastern Kansas, a squall line begins to form along the actual cold front itself. It overtakes the dry line, and that cold front begins to spout up that squall line. But as it moves into Missouri, it breaks up into multiple supercells as it moves across the state. Only one of these supercells would actually go to produce tornadoes, but the fact that the line broke into supercells after it evolved overnight is a mystery that scientists, by scientists, I mean Fred Glass, are still not entirely sure of. But the line would continue towards St. Louis, finally losing its edge around 2 in the morning. St. Louis kind of dodged a bullet from this storm threat here. They only saw one supercell move on through that only produced ping pong ball sized hail over parts of North County that day. And especially into St. Charles County, it produced golf ball sized hail in the town of Cottleville, which is right around where the National Weather Service office is. So this is the supercell that produced those tornadoes at 11:25 in the evening. This is in Benton County. There is our old pal Sedalia. You're probably getting sick of seeing on the screen. This is south of Sedalia. This is Sedalia's like third or fourth storm of the day. Small tornado touchdown near the town of Colcamp, and then another small tornado touchdown about 10 miles east of there near the city of Florence. This is north of Gravois Mills, where that F2 went through a little bit earlier. But then as it approached St. Louis, it really began to ramp up. This is Fulton, which is a town east of Columbia. Columbia is just west of the screen. This was an F2 tornado that moved through Fulton. And the time here is 12:30 to 12:45 in the morning. A home was moved 25 feet off of its foundation, and pieces of a barn were lodged into the concrete median of US Highway 54 just south of Fulton. And then the final two tornadoes would touch down in Lincoln County, Missouri, which is the county just north of St. Charles County, which St. Charles County is kind of the outer lying edge of the St. Louis metro. This is going to move through the town of Silex. The time here is 1:20 to 2 in the morning here. This is an F3 tornado that moves through the town of Silex. Two homes were destroyed near Bellflower and Whiteside, which is right there. Bellflower is right there. Whiteside is right there, with each occupant suffering some major injuries. And tree damage was nearly continuous along the line until it crosses into Illinois. This tornado continues a couple of miles into parts of Illinois. You can see that circulation right there as it kind of crosses through parts of northern Lincoln County. And here is some damage footage from Channel 4, KMOV from St. Louis. This was one of those mobile homes, or one of those homes that was destroyed where the woman suffered the major injuries. Same thing with this one, and it's a little hard to see because the picture is blurry, but it almost looks like that something is wrapped up around that tree. So this tornado was able to grab something and wrap it around that tree. That is a sign of a significant tornado. And here's one of those little barn places that was completely destroyed in the area as well. And the final tornado that touches down is at 1:36, a small tornado near the town of Silex, but it's known as the Millwood F1 tornado. It touched down and it hit a barn and a homestead, suffering some roof damage before it lifts. There's the main tornado right there. That's the F3, and then the F1 touches down in a smaller circulation just south of it by about a mile. So that is kind of the end of the event. The storms slowly start to weaken as they head over towards St. Louis. Here's just a few of the maps. This is all of the tornado reports from both of the days combined. You can see a clear area right around the Sedalia area that had the most amount of tornadoes, but also a lot of tornadoes touching down northwest of St. Louis. A little bit more closer views from each of the National Weather Service offices that saw those tornadoes. There's the Perry County tornado, the Weather Service offices from St. Louis, and then the Kansas City and Springfield areas there. So 49 tornadoes touched down in the state, and a lot of damage was done across the entire state. Here are the storm reports for both of these days. You can see the second day, March the 12th, it is just blanketed in red. The entire state of Missouri is just blanketed all in red from all of those tornado reports. 140 tornado reports. You kind of divide that number a little bit. A lot of those are multiple tornado reports. In total, 68 tornadoes would touch down from this entire event, including multiple in Oklahoma and in Arkansas and Illinois, and even one up in parts of Iowa there as well. And as we kind of do our little closing remarks, this is a radar loop of the entire event from March the 11th and March the 12th. Here you can see those initial supercells developing, those hailstones falling in Columbia that kind of moved on through, and then that one supercell over southern Missouri, right as it gets into our old friend Reynolds County, passes that haunted general store right in there, and it produces those significant tornadoes from Reynolds County into parts of Chester and further into the Mount Vernon area, with a lot of those hailstones kind of moving on through. A flooding threat as well, something that we didn't mention. A flood threat also develops in the southeast as a lot of these thunderstorms are starting to train. Here's the time up here to the north. You can see we still have tornado warnings near Cape Girardeau. This is at 5 o'clock in the morning. As those thunderstorms finally start to move on through, warm front starting to lift off to the north. Attention reverts over to the Kansas City area with that one supercell that produced those 5 tornadoes in the middle of the worst tornado conditions. That supercell weakens as it gets into Missouri. There's that PDS tornado watch. Here's those supercells that kind of develop once again. These are those 2 long track supercells. our old pal Sedalia sitting right in there. So it moves on through. Columbia's right about there. And then as those storms are moving in, round 3 develops, with round 4 kind of trailing right behind it. So in Missouri, notice how this is almost 48 continuous hours of severe weather and tornadoes touching down in the entire state. One of the most prolonged events that I can even see from the Midwest itself. I mean, we get a lot of these prolonged events in the Southeast, but really not in Missouri. You usually kind of see a small window for this severe weather to kind of move on through. And that squall line weakens as it moves into parts of southeastern Missouri. So that is about it for the presentation right in there. I just wanted to give a couple of thank yous. Huge thank you to Eric Aldrich from KOMU, Fred Glass from National Weather Service St. Louis, Zach Paul from KRCG, and Brian Busby from KNBC in Kansas City for agreeing to do interviews on that day. I know for a lot of them, it was 15 years ago. You don't remember a lot of stuff from 15 years ago, but the information that a lot of them gave was very invaluable. Fred Glass especially, he came into it saying, I don't know if I know that much about that day. And then he's giving me exact numbers about that day, about the environmental conditions across southeastern Missouri. So I don't know what Fred Glass is like, if he does know what he's talking about and he does remember it, because that kind of sounds a little scary. If he knows that much information when he claims he doesn't know a whole lot. Also, the National Weather Service offices in St. Louis and Paducah for allowing me to access photos over those days. Again, photos were very scarce to find in this thing. One of our own, Vice President Clint Alexander, for making a tornado table list where I was able to kind of clearly get a lot of that tornado data for each of those tornadoes of the 49. So thank you, Clint, for doing that. And then finally, all of you guys who allow me to ramble about tornadoes for far too long and very rambly, I would presume. But again, that is a huge thank you to all of you for allowing me to do this. This was a lot of fun, a lot of hard work, but also a lot of fun to do. And then those are just a few of the sources, the only sources I could fit on the screen.